but also what's the most logical and helpful next step in their journey. Something we talk a lot about are conversion paths.
Welcome, David. I thought you would be perfect for this as the co-founder of Wired Impact. So you guys, that's all you do is nonprofit websites. So you're kind of
Good.
you're like an expert.
We've been building nonprofit websites for, about 15 years at this point. So worked with some pretty amazing folks and built a whole bunch of sites at this point.
Okay, well, today we're going to be asking a ton of questions around nonprofit website design. And
Great.
I think the first question I want to ask you is, how do we even know if our nonprofit website is working?
It's a great question. And honestly, it's the starting point for a lot of conversations we have with nonprofits. I just want to know, is my site pulling its weight? And when I think about answering this question, I think it's helpful to sort of view it through the lens of just in an ideal world, what role should your website be playing for your organization? And we kind of break it down into three primary areas. So, really, your site should be helping you, first of all, drive traffic, right? Like it should be driving awareness, it should be helping you connect with people who don't know that you exist. And just broadening the base of potential supporters to get involved with your cause. And related to that, the second area is it should be driving conversions. It should be driving meaningful actions from your visitors, right? Like if they're coming to your website, but they're not engaging in meaningful ways, then ultimately your website's not really serving as a tool to help propel your mission forward. So we really want to see not only driving traffic, but also driving those conversions, those meaningful actions from your visitors once they're there. And the final area that I think a lot of times is kind of overlooked is your website should help save time, but both for your visitors and for you, for your staff, for your team. It should be making information really easy for visitors to find so that they're able to find what they're looking for quickly. They're not wasting a whole bunch of time hunting around for things. But also, speaking to the sort of saving your team time, it should be automating things that you're doing manually or answering questions that you get asked all the time. Just really serving as that force multiplier and sort of a capacity generating tool. So, if your website's doing all three of those things, you're probably in pretty good shape. If your website is falling short on any of those areas, it might be time to look for ways to level it up, whether that's improving your existing website or potentially exploring building a new one, just kind of depending on your situation and what you have going on. So we can definitely dive into each of those further if you'd like to, but sort of from a high level, those are the sort of three areas that we like to really circle back to: driving traffic, driving conversions, and saving time.
I have many questions.
Great.
Yeah, yeah. Well, okay, so my our viewers are used to me saying data, 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 right? So I think my first question would be the how do we know if it's really working in terms of those metrics? Like how would I track this?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of folks are using website analytics, right? They're using Google Analytics. Unfortunately, the Google Analytics 4 rollout has made things a little bit more complicated. But a great place to start is looking at historical sort of baselines. And then as you're making changes, document those moments in time and look for just changes in visitor behavior. So, if we're talking about the first one, driving traffic, thankfully, that's not too difficult to see in Google Analytics. You can look for traffic not only kind of across your website in general, but look into traffic from specific sources, specific channels, just to get a sense of, maybe you've gotten a lot more active on LinkedIn or on YouTube, or you've gotten more active driving some links from some of your partners out in the community. You could look to see if there's been a lift in traffic over time. So that's sort of a helpful high level place to start, and something that, again, is relatively easy to pull in Google Analytics. In terms of conversions, it's really going to depend on if you've set up those goals in Google Analytics. They keep changing the name. Right now, they're called key events. That might change over time, but basically, that will allow you to look at the specific behaviors that your visitors are taking on the site and tie those things to your kind of broader organizational goals. And I will say, I think that is a very important step when it comes to measuring the success of your website is making sure that you're not only thinking about what are the most important actions that our visitors are looking to take, but how do those actions connect to our broader goals as an organization? Just taking sort of that moment to step back and really reflect on the broader context around those website goals will go a really long way in making sure that you're not just collecting data for data's sake, but you're tying it to meaningful sort of measures of success that'll move your organizational goals forward. Um, in terms of saving time, that's going to be one that's a little bit maybe more abstract to measure, but you could definitely look at um, whether or not you're able to automate some things you're doing manually now. So, what I actually recommend folks do is sort of audit a lot of your manual processes that are happening on the website. Maybe a good example could be maybe you are answering a lot of phone calls, answering a lot of questions that are coming in from people who maybe were on your website, couldn't find what they were looking for. Maybe they're reaching out about questions related to your services or your programs. Maybe you're able to cut that time down just by being more thoughtful about the content on your website, making it easier for folks to find the information they're looking for. You might be able to actually reduce the time your team is spending answering questions. And then there's also certainly processes that you could automate. So, like maybe a good example could be um, manual data entry. Maybe data when a donor donates through the site, maybe right now you're manually entering some of that information into a donor management system. If you're able to automate that process, that could be something that frees up a fair amount of time, and you could actually measure the difference between the time you're spending on manual data entry versus things that you're able to automate now, and how many of those processes have you been able to automate over time. In terms of another area that you could consider if you really want to get granular about testing some of these changes is looking into A/B testing. There are quite a few tools out there that would allow you to actually run A/B tests, sort of split tests on content on your website, and you could actually see which content is performing. Sort of play a constant game of beat the winner, where you are optimizing your content just to really see what resonates with your visitors and what's going to ultimately drive them to take those meaningful actions that we talked about before.
I know when I normally talk about A/B testing with nonprofits, their eyes glaze over. They want nothing to do
Sure.
with it, but it's so important.
Hang tight, just a quick moment to thank our sponsors, Click and Pledge, because they get nonprofit fundraising. So whether you're hosting a Zoom event with their innovative Give Event feature, launching a peer-to-peer campaign, or setting up your donor-friendly pages, Click and Pledge makes it easy to handle it all without the headaches. It is the all-in-one fundraising platform. And here's what I love. Transparent pricing, 48-hour payouts, seamless Salesforce integration, all backed by top-notch security. It's the platform I trust, and it makes my life so much easier. So check them out and see how Click and Pledge can transform your fundraising. All right, back to the video.
I always push folks to also, especially as you get to know your visitors better, honing in on your audiences and their problems and why they turn to you will really help set you up for success when it comes to just a lot of different facets of your website.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of our viewers have heard me say a million times, know your donors, know your audience, know your, not
Yeah,
just their demographics, their psychographics, so that we can tailor our content to them. Definitely.
that's right.
Okay. My next big question is going to be, what are some of the things you're seeing nonprofits do that they shouldn't be doing? Because I know I was on a website last night that had a bazillion links.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, that's definitely one of them. The way that we approach this is thinking of common, we call them conversion rate killers. Just what are those things that are really getting in the way of your visitors taking those meaningful actions that we just talked about, right? Because those conversions again should be really tied intimately to your organizational goals. And so we want to do anything we possibly can to get visitors to take those meaningful next steps in their journey. So the first one here is targeting everyone, connecting with no one. And this really speaks to what you were just mentioning about really knowing your donors, knowing your supporters, knowing your website visitors, but really honing in on one or two primary audiences. I know that's really hard, especially for nonprofits. Nonprofits end up needing to speak to a lot of different audiences, but if at all possible, really push yourself to think of the one or two primary audiences for your website. You can still have a bunch of secondary audiences, they can still be very important, but when it comes to the key pages of your site, when it comes to really deciding things like your navigation, your calls to action, you're just going to want to bias towards those primary audiences as much as you can. Because if you're trying to speak to everyone, you end up connecting with no one. We always talk about resonance over reach being the best way to maximize the actual conversion rates, the actual engagement rates of your websites. So in terms of how you actually do that, I mean, certainly getting really clear on your primary audience is going to be really, really important. And taking it a step beyond that, just really thinking about what problems are they facing? What challenges are they turning to us to help them solve? And also, what are the unique ways that we can help them solve those problems? Like going that extra step gets you to what we call your differentiated value, which is just how you can stand out from other organizations out there, right? Because there's probably other organizations generally operating in the space that you're operating in, but if you can really hone in on those ways that you uniquely solve the problem, your sort of unique perspective or your unique approach, that'll help you really resonate with more of the right folks and more quickly position yourself to stand out in people's minds. Because honestly, most organizations are not losing donors or supporters to another nonprofit. They're losing them just to apathy. They're losing them to distraction. They're losing them to just, not quite motivating them to cross that threshold to get involved. And so, if you can really cut through the noise by leaning into that very specific thing that makes you different, it'll help you more quickly connect with the people that you need to be connecting with and drive them to action. So that's one of them. And related to that, another common conversion rate killer is just your pitch isn't clear enough. You're maybe talking about things in a slightly unspecific way. Maybe you're talking about things in different ways that get a little confusing to your visitors. And something else we say often is that a confused mind never converts. So if there's any confusion in the minds of your visitors, they're not going to take actions. They're not going to stick around. They're not going to read more pages. They're going to leave. And so it's honestly more important than ever just thinking about how, distracted folks are. Maybe they're viewing your website on their phone while they're waiting in carpool line to pick their kiddo up from school. We just don't have people's undivided attentions as much as we'd like to think. And so really honing in on that pitch is going to be really, really important. And in terms of how you do this, a few good places to start. One is just stripping the jargon from the content that you've created. Look at your mission statement, look at your vision statements, look at the content on your highest leverage pages, and just say, would someone who does not live in our cause all day, every day, understand what we're talking about here? And for a lot of folks, there's room for improvement. They could really translate what they're saying into plain English to be that more kind of accessible entry point for their visitors. And then another great step here is talk to some of the leadership folks around your organization. Could be staff members, board members. Just ask them to kind of describe your work, your key programs, and clue into the language that they're using, especially differences, because that could be sort of a sign of maybe some inconsistencies in how people across the organization are talking about it. And that could certainly be showing up not only on your website, but your marketing more broadly. And then one other step that I often recommend related to this and honestly just getting to know your audience better is actually conducting interviews. These can be donor interviews, volunteer interviews, interviews with program participants, just longtime supporters of your cause. And if you really clue in on the language that folks are using when they describe your work, when they describe what motivated them to get involved, that can be really effective, especially if you then translate their language into your content, into your marketing efforts, because you know these are the people that of all the nonprofits in the world, they decided to support your cause, right? They decided to get involved with your organization. There's probably other people like them out there. So if you can use their language, that can help you just more kind of closely connect with their motivation and more likely strike a chord with those similar folks in your audience that might be more inclined to get involved with your cause.
What if you had, like, you've basically got 5 minutes, not to put the pressure on, 5 minutes
Sure.
to tell our viewers who are mostly newer nonprofits, they're newer fundraisers, newer founders. They're the ones that have that website that they did themselves,
Yeah.
that they just kind of maybe even used a template. So what would you say to them? I put you on
You're
the
right.
spot.
Putting the pressure on. It's a big question to tackle in a few minutes. So there's a couple of things that I would recommend doing. So the first is auditing the current website just to get a sense of where you're starting from, right? So don't immediately jump to making changes, but read every page of your website and document just whether or not the messaging feels like it is consistent, whether it feels like a good representation of your cause. And we have an audit template we can also share here just to help you prioritize those. But the sort of the analog here is imagine writing a book one page at a time over several years. Like there's just no way that that book would be compelling. It wouldn't tie together well for your readers, but that's exactly what we've done with a lot of our websites, right? Like we've published a new page here, we've combined some pages there, we've removed some pages, and a lot of times there's just kind of holes in the visitor journey. So making an annual habit, we usually recommend around the new year, just auditing your site, giving it a read, documenting high priority things that need to change can be a really good place to start. And what I often recommend is with each page of your website, especially the high leverage pages, ask yourself a few questions. First, who's the primary audience of this page? So, again, we're talking about audience a lot, but there's a good reason. It's critically important. And it's honestly something that a lot of folks sort of rush through because they say, well, our audience is potentially anyone. But again, if you're trying to speak to everyone, you end up resonating with no one. So get really clear on who is the audience for this page. What question are they trying to answer? What challenge are they bringing with them? And again, what's the unique way that we can help? What's the unique perspective that we have on solving that? But also, what's the most logical and helpful next step in their journey? Something we talk a lot about are conversion paths. It's just the route that a visitor takes through your website from the moment they land on your site to the moment they convert or take those meaningful actions. And actually running through those conversion paths can be a really illuminating experience because you might find a few things. One, you might find things that are just flat out broken. So obviously, you want to address those as quickly as possible. But you also just might find points of friction that are getting in the way of your visitors ultimately taking that action on your site. So I tend to lean on this gas tank analogy a lot when it comes to visitor engagement. And the whole idea is that visitors come to your website with a certain amount of gas in their tank. You can think of that as their motivation to get involved. And everyone has a different amount, right? Some people really believe very deeply in your cause. It's been something they've cared about for years. Maybe they were personally impacted by it in some way. And then maybe someone else, just like their friend, posted something on LinkedIn and they clicked through to see your site. Their motivation is going to be a lot lower. But you need to get them to that point of action, that destination before the gas runs out. And so you don't know the motivation they're bringing, but what you can control is the amount of friction in their way, the amount of sort of roadblocks that are getting in the way of them taking those actions. So go through those journeys, those conversion paths from start to finish, and look for anything that is unnecessary or broken or confusing that might be adding friction to that process. And really get ruthless here. If there's a form, only include the most essential elements. Cut any field that you don't need today. You can always get more information from folks down the road. If there's anything that's confusing, really streamline it. If there's any calls to action that are kind of getting lost in the page, make them more prominent. really just reducing friction along those journeys can go a really long way. And the last thing I'll say on this front is once you've audited the site and you have a sense of the changes that you'd like to make, I push folks to really prioritize those changes using a few criteria. So the first is the impact. So, if this is intimately connected to a really important action on our site, it's going to have a high impact, probably something that maybe should get attention sooner. The second area is the reach. So, in addition to the impact, just the reach is how many folks does this impact? Is it just a very small group of people? Is it all of our website visitors? The reach is going to influence how soon you should make a change. And the last is the cost, just the time, the money that's going to go into fixing that issue. So, all else being equal, you're going to look for high impact, high reach, low cost changes that you can make to get the sort of best, you can get the most bang for your buck. You can get the most return on the time that you're putting in. So those are a few things that I would push folks to do. Again, a lot more you could do, but I think that's a helpful starting point that doesn't require deep technical knowledge, doesn't require you to hire a developer. Hopefully, unless things are broken, you might need to bring in a little bit of development support. But generally, those are things that you could do on your own, don't take a ton of time, and can have an outsized impact on the engagement rates that you're seeing across your website.
Mm. And I will say, no, you're not sponsoring this, but it's worth it. It is so worth it to go and talk to you and have you develop our website. The return on investment. So funders are creeping us. Donors are creeping us. And if they come to our website and it's a mess and they can't understand things, you could potentially lose grants or corporate sponsorships. It's very important. So I want to take a second and I want you to chat with us a little bit about what you do.
Sure. Yeah. So I think it's helpful context to just understand the ways that nonprofits can build websites. So there are kind of three major approaches. One is a DIY approach like Squarespace, Wix. That's a place where a lot of nonprofits start. And then there's the custom approach, which a lot of nonprofits are familiar with. Hire an agency, build something from scratch. Um, and that's actually what we used to do. We used to be much more of a traditional agency. The problem that we kept coming across is we kept hearing from organizations that were sort of falling through the middle of those two approaches. They had outgrown DIY, but they couldn't afford the websites that we were building from scratch. And we just didn't have a great recommendation for them. And so when we set out to solve this problem, we essentially said, how can we serve these nonprofits in the middle, these folks that are sort of falling through the cracks of these more traditional approaches? So that's actually where we live today. A lot of times you'll hear these called nonprofit website platforms. And essentially, it's a subscription service. So you pay a monthly fee. It includes not only building the website, but also the ongoing support to get the most out of it. And that's really how I describe it. It's the tech that a nonprofit needs to build an amazing site that they're proud to share with the world. And then it's the ongoing support that they need to get the most out of it. So we can roll in a bunch of the ongoing costs like hosting and updates to the actual software that's powering the website. We build on WordPress for folks that have heard of WordPress. And then really it's that ongoing support piece. Whenever you have a question about the site, you can reach out to us. We can help get you pointed in the right direction, or we can actually make changes on your behalf because we know nonprofits are strapped for time. But I'll be the first to say it is not the right fit for every nonprofit. There are a lot of great folks out there that are building websites. So if you have questions about your nonprofit's situation, don't hesitate to reach out. If we're not the right fit, we can put you in touch that someone that is.
Okay. And I'm going to link your contact information and those resources you mentioned in the video description.
Great.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, David. This has been great. I've just seen so many terrible nonprofit websites that are just, yeah, that's what happened with the animal rescues. It was so bad. I had to go in and I had to fix it.
It's heartbreaking because there's so many organizations out there doing amazing work, and we hear from folks all the time that they're just embarrassed to send their website to potential supporters. And so, yeah, anything we can do to answer questions for your visitors, or for anything we can do to answer questions for your viewers, we are happy to do it.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you.